Hello and welcome to the final notes seminar presentation of the semester that will include information about reading fluency. Reading fluency, in this particular case, we're talking about building prosody, accuracy, and reading rate with repeated readings. Note that there is also a speaking fluency, especially when we're talking about ESL students or ELLs. But in this case, we are specifically focused on reading fluency. So what is reading fluency? It's the ability to read efficiently and effectively. It is also called automaticity. And if you use your decoding skills that we've been working with in your spelling inventory and word sorts, you know that if you break up automaticity into its smaller parts, you see the word automatic there. Simply meaning fluency and automaticity are synonyms because if we read fluently, we are reading automatically. Reading fluency is also being able to read multiple words in a row with little or no noticeable cognitive or mental effort. In addition to that, when you are able to read fluently, you are also able to comprehend what you're reading. There are three components to fluency. And think of this as an assessment because fluency is very similar to a running record. So when we are assessing our students' fluency, we're looking for three things, and that's these three components. The first is the reading rate. That's the speed in which the text is being read and the words are being decoded. By the end of third grade, a student who's been given instruction with multiple opportunities to learn new vocabulary, that student should be able to read 100 words per minute, again, by the end of third grade. The second component of fluency is accuracy. We want to see how accurately a student reads when we are assessing their fluency. That's the percentage of words the student reads correctly out of a certain number of words. Third component is prosody. That's how a student reads. Do they read with pauses? Do they read with stumbling over some words? Do they have to stop and ask questions? If they do those three things, they are not reading prosodically. With prosody, the student will read without hesitation. Remember, mental and cognitive effort is nothing when a student's reading fluently. So the prosody is the expression, appropriate phrasing, and attention to punctuation that fluent readers use when they read a text orally. The procedures that you would follow if you were going to assess a student in their fluency skills is very, very similar to a running record, despite a couple of slightly different changes. You'll have the student sit next to you and read a short text out loud while you're monitoring. In fluency, there are some similar coding marks that you would use in the fluency assessment as we did in the running record assessment, and you'll see that momentarily. If the student misreads a word, hesitates, or asks for help, read the word and have the student repeat it back to you. And then you have the student repeat the reading 3 times. You may also code and document the behaviors the student's exhibiting those 3 times. When you are assessing a student's fluency, always encourage the student to read their best, not their fastest. And don't set it up as a race. You want to make sure to keep your student calm and feel secure, especially if they're already challenged with their reading or have any insecurities with their reading. It's best to not set them up as it's a race by saying ready, set, go. You would simply very calmly say to them, you may begin reading now. And at the same time, you start a timer and you allow the student to read to the end of 1 minute, and that's where they would stop. When a student's reading something multiple times, as you noted in the slide before this one, reading in an assessment 3 repeated times, there is a benefit to that. Science and research has shown that when a student reads something repeatedly, the same text over and over again, their word recognition gets better, their decoding gets faster, they acquire more confidence when reading, and once you read something more than once, you begin to understand it even better. I am a prime example of this, where I have to read something 2 and 3 times to be able to catch every nuance of everything that I read. So all of these things are benefits to reading something more than once. When you're given a fluency assessment, we're not going to do one with your case study. This is something we're just talking about in class, and we're going to practice in class. So this is not going to be something that you'll do with a student. But for your future classroom, you'll need to know that in a fluency assessment, you choose a grade level passage for each of your students. You'll know your student's level and you'll know what they can handle as an assessment. You time the assessment at 1 minute. As your student is reading for that 1 minute, you are coding for errors, very similar to the running record, with substitutions, omissions, appeal and tells, etc. There are also opportunities for self-correction. The student may insert or repeat something while involved in a fluency assessment, but those do not count as errors and are not coded necessarily. At the end of 1 minute, you ask the student to stop reading, and wherever the student ends reading, on that very last word they read, at the time the clock goes off after 1 minute, you write a / on the paper that you're using to code to show where the student stopped. Remember, the student's going to do this 2 more times, and the hope is that upon each repeated reading, the student reads more words and has better comprehension of what they're reading. Just like the running record, there are error equations that you would follow to be able to determine your student's fluency rate. To get the fluency rate specifically, you take the total number of words the student read and subtract the errors. There we get the words correct per minute. And remember, the student is only reading for 1 minute. So it's the total number of words minus the number of errors the student made. And then you want to know what level the student is. Very similar again to the running record, where there is instructional level right in the middle where we want them. There is also independent level, which means the text was too simple, and the frustrational level, which means the student read something that was too difficult. So when we're looking for the level of text, we take the words correct per minute divided by how many words the student read, and multiply by 100 to get your percentage. So words correct per minute divided by words read times 100 for the level of text. When we're measuring prosody, the NAEP has described prosody for our students in different levels. And you might recognize this with some of the students that you see in your mentors classes at Bowie. The level 1 reader, who's not necessarily prosodic with reading, is one who reads primarily word by word. I think of this as a kindergartner who is still pointing at each word in a sentence and recognizing that there is space between the words in a sentence. But also when we're talking about ELLs and teaching English to non-English speakers, we may have level 1 prosodic fluent readers because they're still working on building their English skills. Level 2 is just a little bit higher level prosody than level 1, 2-word phrases that are haphazardly grouped. Level 3, we're getting a few more words in there, but not prosodic, where there's not some hesitation or not some skipping over things. And then level 4 is expression and full prosody. When the student's independent level, they make no more than one error per 20 words, which is about 95% accuracy, and shows good comprehension. This particular type of text is generally used for kids who are going to go pick their own book or their own piece of text to read silently during deer time. Instructional level is that 90 to 94% accuracy. Okay comprehension when they're at instructional level. Remember, this is kind of where we want all of our students to hit, because we don't want to give them something that's too easy and we don't want to assess them on something that's too hard. We want to be able to teach them. So we want to try to get our students to the 90 to 94% accuracy rate. Here, the teacher or peer support could be influential in helping the student read prosodically. And then, of course, frustrational level is one error per 10 words, or about 90% accuracy, with little to no comprehension of what was read. Of course, this one's too difficult for a student to read, and in order to keep their effective filter low, you want to assess them on things that do not challenge their safety and security in your classroom. So don't require students to read text at their frustrational levels. What should teachers do to influence fluency? Just like we did with read alouds, you're modeling appropriate reading and thinking out loud as you're reading. You do that for your students every time you read. So if you're a model of fluent reading, that's your job. That's what you should be doing, is reading things to students in your class using your fluency skills. You should allow time for students to read the same text over and over and over again, because repeated reading works to improve fluency. Make sure that the material you're asking students to read is instructional level, or giving them the opportunity to choose independent level reading during their own time. And then allow the students to count their own fluency, accuracy, and rate. So when the students know what their accuracy and rates level are, they are a little more competitive and they're more interested in reading and hopefully building on their fluency skills. The teacher, again, models in a read aloud how to correctly phrase and intonate while reading. A teacher will model and point out for students what to listen for when they're demonstrating a read aloud, using think alouds, which of course you have practiced already. And then, of course, again, giving students the opportunity to reread text repeatedly and helps their fluency. If you've ever been in a classroom where a teacher put you in a circle, everyone had the same book or the same text, and asked you to read one person at a time, one chapter or one paragraph at a time, that's called round robin reading. I remember doing that when I was in school. In fact, I remember even when I was doing some field observations as an education major, being in a classroom where the teacher had the students reading this way. And what tended to happen was that students who were tired, students who weren't confident, students who just didn't want to read that day were allowed to skip. And what was happening was that the same students, 2 or 3 of them out of a group of 10 or 15, were the only ones reading. That takes away the accountability of each of the students in the class. So round robin reading has been kind of on the outs when it comes to teaching reading for quite some time. Tompkins, as you can see as part of our source here, says that round robin reading does not promote reading fluency. If you're allowed to skip and there's no accountability and all you're doing is simply reading a chapter and not getting involved in a story all the way through, then this is not an appropriate means of teaching reading. So why do we not do this? Why should we move away from doing this? It's an inaccurate view of reading because students have no opportunity to rehearse. If the students don't know already what they're going to read, and they're already checked out, and they know they don't have to read until the 10th paragraph, but they're the 10th in line, they're just counting to the 10th paragraph and waiting. They're not reading along, they're not listening. It causes inefficient reading habits and inattentive behaviors. If you've got antsy kids in your class who already don't care and you want them sitting there waiting and listening while other students are struggling to read, or if they're not interested in what they're reading, this will definitely lead to management problems in the classroom. It can be a source of anxiety and embarrassment. If you were to run a round-robin group where you required each student to read, big time bad news for your kids who have reading issues, who are embarrassed, who are nervous. It creates an unsafe environment in your classroom for those students. And it can work against students developing effective reading strategies. If all they're reading is one tiny paragraph every 10 students, they're not using their skills to comprehend. They're not using their skills to build their vocabulary. In essence, round-robin reading does not promote reading fluency and is not a good way to get students to read. Some other research on fluency instruction shows that guided reading practice influences fluency for all students. Silent reading does not necessarily improve fluency, especially if they're already reading at the independent level and they're picking their independent level work. Cueing for accuracy and rate helps improve fluency. So if you have your students tracking their own accuracy and rate, it helps them improve their own fluency. And transfer is one of those ESL words where from one language to the next, let's say the L1 to the L2, the students transferring what they know from their L1 into their L2. Better transfer occurs when using passages with a high degree of word commonality. So if they're reading two different passages about the same thing, but differently written, as long as there are some similar words, then fluency can be improved that way. Repeated reading remains the gold standard in building fluency instruction. And combining modeling, repeated reading, and progress monitoring is the best way to get students to be excited about reading. Modeling is read alouds and the teacher doing their job of effective reading and showing fluency. Having the students read the same text multiple times, 3 to 4 times, is sufficient. And the progress monitoring is the actual assessing of the fluency skills and determining accuracy, rate, and prosody. How can you do this in your classroom? Choral reading is one thing where all of the students have the same piece and they all read at the same time. Echo reading is when the teacher or a peer will read something and then the students will read the same thing back as an echo. Right now, students are very much required, at Bowie especially, very much required to read from an online program that assesses their reading fluency. So those types of computer-based reading opportunities help students build their fluency. And the idea is that the computer system will track the data instead of the teacher having to track the data. Chunking or rereading portions of a text or rereading a whole text is great. And then performance reading, which is reader's theater. And we're going to work on practicing a performance reading in class when we meet on the Monday after Thanksgiving. That's our presentation over fluency. Hopefully now you have 3 components of fluency. We will practice the coding, we will practice some fluency reading, and we will complete a reader's theater in class. Hopefully this will be of benefit to you when it comes time to plan your fluency assessments in your own class, but also for your Texas exam for the EC through 6 core generalist test. Good luck, ladies and gentlemen.